Alright, today I want to have a discussion that I think some people may not be ready for, because after seeing what he can do on Egghead Island, it's pretty clear I'd say that Kizaru is absolutely one of the most broken characters in all of One Piece. Like, he's way stronger than people give him credit for. He's capable of going toe-to-toe with a Yonko, Luffy, and absolutely makes light work of the rest of the Straw Hats. And then he's not even close to being the strongest admiral in the first place. So today I want to, give you a presentation about everything that we know about the Admirals and why they are pretty awesome, since I do think that they're all capable of leveling islands, defeating some of the Yonko, and they may actually turn out to be the final endgame threats for some of the Straw Hats and the Revolutionaries. In other words, I'm gonna put a stop to the Admiral slander today, and I think a lot of people keep forgetting that the rank of Admiral is not like handed out to anyone. Each of these characters can hang with the Yonko and have been seen making quick work of some Yonko commanders. So cut out the hate and don't you dare use Shanks showing up to stop Greenbull at Wano as a counterpoint for this. There was a full Yonko crew on Wano in the form of the Straw Hats as well, the Scabbards with Yamato and Momonosuke, and then on top of that, the Red Hair Pirates offshore as well, plus the remainders of Kaido's crew. Even though it looked pretty cowardly, Greenbull would have been kind of stupid to square off with all of these pirates. Kizaru throws hands with Gear 5 Luffy. Kuzan prepared himself to solo the entire Blackbeard crew? What? And Akainu has stepped to Whitebeard himself. Like, these dudes are more than powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the dreaded Yonko, and in fact, their power is just on a completely different level from most everyone in the world government, which is why there are only 7 canon characters that have achieved this level in the series. So, to be fair, Garp could have if he wanted to, I'm pretty sure. He just doesn't like the red tape that comes with the job, if you get my drift. All of them are absolutely capable of using advanced forms of Haki, and despite the fact that only Sengoku is confirmed to be a Conqueror's Haki user at this point, come on, it's pretty likely that this will change as Oda ushers us deeper into the endgame. Plus, as I previously stated, they also each have a special devil fruit, mostly Logia fruits, with a couple of exceptions, interestingly enough, and for good reason. Because by combining their really broken Haki with their really broken devil fruit powers, you do the simple math, each of these top level marines become some of the most broken characters in the series. And of course, despite all of this crazy island shaping powers, they are also still the lapdogs of the Celestial Dragon somehow. No, fun stuff. Nonetheless, the Admirals only really answer to a couple of people in the entire show. They all do answer to the Fleet Admiral, the strongest and most capable of the current Admirals. Now, normally that person only answers to the Commander-in-Chief of the world government, as well as the Gorosei, who are the leaders of the Celestial Dragons. However, we have seen multiple times in the series that the Admirals technically answer and follow the orders of any Celestial Dragon that are around them, because we do actually know that they're going to be dispatched when a Celestial Dragon gets attacked, and they have to go and defend whoever that is. This can be seen, for example, during Sabaody Archipelago, as well as the Revolutionaries' attack on Marijoa. More importantly though, let's talk outfits here. All of them are dripped out in these epic suits, and admittedly, I kind of want all of them for my collection, specifically Kizaru's. Like, look at how nasty that yellow one is. It's clean. Super clean. You know what I'm saying, right? Okay. Speaking of Kizaru, I do think we can shift over now to focusing on the first of the Admirals with him, because he might actually just be the most complicated out of all of them, and possibly also the most important that any of the Admirals can offer, actually. And it's at this point already that I hope I can teach you something that some people apparently don't actually know about the Admirals, which is that they all technically aren't named what you think they are. You see, all the Admirals have an animal title as well as a color that matches it. From a design standpoint, it's pretty simple because all of them wear these colors in their marine outfits. I mean, Kizaru, for example, is actually an epithet. His official title translated from Japanese, Kizaru, is actually the yellow monkey, and his actual name is just Borsalino. And I kinda gotta admit, I wish more people called him Borsalino because I think it's a pretty fun name to say, Borsalino. Kizaru is cool, but Borsalino? And that is beautiful. Rolls off the tongue. He actually gets his name and title from 2 different sources. Yellow Monkey is part of, a trilogy with Akainu and Aokiji, where their epithets mimic the animals featured in the Momotaro tale, and his personality actually matches the monkey from that story as well, being a lax and absent-minded character. But then he also draws his name from a French film called Borsalino, as well as a French fedora company named You guessed it, also Borsalino. And both of these things kind of explain his mafia-esque attire and literally the fedora he's seen wearing in his younger years as well, like here when he's arresting Arlong. Now, another quick fact about Kizaru and all the Admirals going forward is that they are also based on famous Japanese actors known for detective and Yakuza films. And Borsalino here steals his design elements from Kunie Tanaka, a very famous actor here in Japan from the 70s throughout the 90s, I think if I remember correctly. But you actually came here for the bigger facts, right? Like, these are fun facts. Probably the ones, you know, focused on the epic powers that this dude has, and I don't blame you because after Aked Island, I firmly believe that Kizaru could probably become the Fleet Admiral if he maybe tried. I mean, he has the Pika Pika no Mi Devil Fruit, and no, that's not a Pikachu-themed zone fruit, as awesome as that would be. It's a light-based Logia fruit that allows Kizaru to transform his body into pure light, create light clones, manifest light weapons, like this straight-up awesome sword here, and fire off light projectiles. And Pika is kind of the sound that light would make, like something reflecting, which is actually why Pikachu is, you know, the light mouse, because it does that as... Anyways, Kizaru also has used his power to drastically boost, you know, the power of his own hits, as moving that fast at light speed, even though, you know, that's debatable, really helps him generate absurd amounts of force behind his kicks and punches. Hands down, I genuinely think that it is one of the all-time most broken abilities and devil fruits in One Piece, and apparently so does Oda, because he had to give it one key weakness to kind of nerf it. Like, yeah, unfortunately, my man Kizaru can only move in straight lines, replicating the flow of light being a laser beam that moves in one direction. Kind of, that's how you can envision it. But it's okay, since he's faster than a Yonko like Luffy using his Snake Man transformation, a power solely focused on speed. And since we're now apparently already talking about his powers, something that I really love is what his attacks are named after. You see, Kizaru and I have at least one thing in common, and it's a love for Japanese history and mythology, it seems. His signature light attacks are all named after Japan's 3 sacred treasures. His light sword is based on the divine sword, the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. The move he uses to reflect light off surfaces and move to the location is based on the mirror, the Yata no Kagami. And when he wants to just swarm an enemy with light bullets, like he does to Law here after Marineford, he uses the move named after the sacred jewel, Yasakani no Magatama. So here you're wondering, with powers like this, how has Kizaru not become the Fleet Admiral? He sounds pretty broken, and honestly, yeah, I ask myself that very question every single day. When I wake up and look into the mirror, I have like a deep moment of self-reflection and just imagine Kizaru achieving his true power. And then I kind of remember that he's got a very specific ethical and moral compass. Like, he is supposed to be ambiguous. It's kind of by Oda's design. Kind of like all the Admirals, Kizaru practices his very own form of justice. Specifically, he embodies unclear justice, a style of justice that sits in a moral gray area here. As we learn throughout Aked Island, he tends to view himself mostly as just a cog in the machine, but has no problem pushing back against those who gave him orders when he does feel something needs to be done or handled a certain way. And throughout the Aked arc, this is displayed plenty of times, where we actually also learned a ton about Kizaru's past with Sentomaru, Vegapunk, and Bonnie and Kuma. Also, seeing as I normally talk to the manga crowd, but I assume you could potentially be an anime-only person watching right now, I quickly want to warn you. Don't worry, I will be warning you when I'm going to shift into big spoiler territory a few times throughout this video, so if you want to avoid some Aked Island reveals, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen right now, where I'll finish up talking about Kizaru's role in the story. I got you, don't worry. Okay, skip right now and then spoiler stuff. Cool. Alright, since you're still with me, it means you and I are manga people after all, or you really don't care about spoilers, I guess, so let's get into it. Kizaru was actually stationed at Aked Island way before the series started. And even earlier than that, he was with Vegapunk and a much younger Sentomaru, as his light powers are the basis of a ton of Vegapunk research. That's right, it seems like all of the cool hard light, holograms, and obviously the Pacifista's lasers are all based on Kizaru's Pika Pika no Mi powers. It was also revealed by Oda that Kizaru is the one who trained Sentomaru, helping him become the capable fighter that we see absolutely wreck pre-time skip Luffy on multiple occasions as well. And in a way, it's a really funny turn of events actually, as Kizaru was initially sent to arrest Vegapunk, but then ended up helping him and securing that research for the government. Which kind of makes me wonder, if I ever get arrested, could I just offer the police all of my One Piece research? I think like that might work in Japan, right? It's gotta be worth something. Like, maybe if I discover what the One Piece really is, I'll get a get out of jail free card once or something like that. Regardless, I think this is actually an excellent display of his unclassified unclear justice at work here, showing that he's not against shifting his stance if there is a greater benefit by defying orders. Anyhow, after all of this goes down, Kizaru is then responsible for detaining Arlong real quick after Fisher Taiga dies. Just a cool little fun fact I found, though. Thought you might appreciate that. Later on, closer to right before the start of the series, Kizaru was then stationed on Egghead Island once again, and that's where he then met young Bonnie and Kuma. And we actually learned this during the Kuma flashback during chapter 1100. You see, someone from the government had to oversee Bonnie getting treated for her sapphire scales disease, as you know, kind of the arrangement that Kuma had made with Vegapunk and the world government. As a result, Kizaru was sent to Egghead Island to keep things in line, and it's during this very time period that Kizaru really connected with all of these people, forming a somewhat close dynamic with Kuma, the young Bonnie, and reinforcing his bonds with Vegapunk and Sentomaru, kind of becoming this quirky, almost family-esque kind of thing. And as you could imagine, this was another key moment in Kizaru's unclear justice, as he knows Kuma will lose his life or his free will to the world government and still oversees it without any questions asked. But it still doesn't stop him from striking the Nika pose and eating some sloppy cheese pizza as they all laugh and cheer together. Alright, that's enough of the Kuma flashback explanation, so thank you for joining me on my little detour here. Kind of feel like if you really wanted to know what's going on with the Admirals though, and especially with Kizaru, since he's so important, that is some crucial information that, you know, tells you quite a lot about his choices and his mindset throughout the entire series. Like, he is a really fun and complicated written character, but more importantly, he's a weapon unlike any other the government has. And so with all of that covered, Kizaru's story is complete, but his role in the story is of course far from over. He's crazy powerful, but he's the most likely Marine, in my opinion, to flip, it seems, going into the final war. Like, I can absolutely see a world where after the events of Egghead Island, where that was teased multiple times, Kizaru may actually end up assisting someone like the Revolutionaries or even the Straw Hats. Don't forget that he was the one who fed Luffy to, you know, give him energy again to fight the Gorosei. But considering that he's truly unclear, he may end up staying as a cog in the machine until he kicks the bucket in the end as well. Unlike the next Admiral, the Blue Pheasant Aokiji. I slipped it in there, so in case you needed me to point it out better, that is what Aokiji means, and, you know, is his little animal epithets theme going on. His real name is Kuzan, and don't worry, I know you want to know what actor he's based on too. He's designed after Yusaku Matsuda, who I just recently learned, like, is incredibly important when it comes to anime, actually. Because apparently both Spike Spiegel and Cowboy Bebop and Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star were all based on this character, so you're in pretty good company, Kuzan. And to say the least, I absolutely am an Aokiji enjoyer. I love that character, and he's got a lot of lore importance and also happens to be involved in one of, if not the most important events in the modern era. You guessed it, this man helped destroy me. Now, I meant the name of the channel, silly. Now, I may be Manu, but I'm also Ohara, sort of like how Kuzan is his name, but Aokiji is his title. See, right above the subscribe button down here. Where is it here? It's here. I should have just looked down. It says Ohara here, which just happens to be the island that Aokiji helped basically nuke off the map. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. I need to explain his powers first. Aokiji, of course, wields the mighty power of the Hie Hie no Mi, which grants him ice Logia powers. Or I guess technically cold Logia powers, like he controls cold, but it usually, you know, is ice. And as you can imagine, in a world like One Piece, which is like 95% water, it seems, his abilities are beyond useful. He can freeze water, including the ocean, helping him solve a Devil Fruit user's key weakness of drowning. It also lets him drastically improve his area of effect, as when he's battling on a beach or out at sea, he can just freeze everything like he straight up did at Marineford when he froze Whitebeard's tsunami. We also learn that he's capable of freezing small islands in their entirety, as we learn from Punk Hazard and Cacao Island post time skip. Like, he can even just casually ride a bicycle across the ocean by freezing the water below and in front of him, which is just way harder, I think, than it looks, and is just such a cool way of traveling. I personally think this is his best feat in the series, since it requires dexterity to the absolute maximum. And as you can expect, this dude loves to put some bodies on ice as well, both literally and metaphorically. He has disposed of tons of people, but he also loves to just sort of keep people around in ice time capsules. So technically he used that specific move on Saul, but he did a very similar thing against Garp recently, or also also the Straw Hats while they were on Long Ring Long Island. Also, for good measure, just like Kizaru, Aokiji can of course also make an ice sword or ice spear, because why not, to deal with his enemies. Oh, also I was obligated to talk about the ice block pheasant beak attack by one of my team members, because it's his favorite attack in the series, based exclusively on how Kuzan says it in the anime. And yeah, I kind of get it. Kuzan does have one of the best voice actors in both the dub and the sub, even though I'm more of a sub person myself. But hey, to each their own when it comes to anime. Shout out to both of their beautiful deliveries though. Seriously. Also, while we're at it, I should also talk about Kuzan's history and choices, because he's one of the most important characters in the entire series, at least based on the fact that he's listed as one of the key players on the way to finding the One Piece in chapter 1121. Like, how did he end up fighting Garp? Why is he with Blackbeard now? And what does his justice truly mean? Stick around, buddy. I'm about to tell you. Alright, Aokiji's history is actually one of the first things teased about him when he was first introduced. It's actually surprisingly deep and starts with him as a very young Marine who yearned to change the world. Many years ago, a young Kuzan once practiced so-called burning justice with a passion unlike any other Marine. And it was this part of him and his willingness to put his fists to work that inspired Garp to train him in the first place. They'd build up his power together by punching the battleship bags, which are basically giant naval ships that Kuzan and Garp would punch and destroy without the use of haki, by the way. But Kuzan did eventually have a change in tempo though, because as a Vice Admiral, he witnessed a catastrophic sight. He was amongst the people sent to destroy the island of Ohara for researching the true history of the world. And it was this act of destruction, this atrocity, that connected him to Saul and Nico Robin. Aokiji froze his former Marine colleague in a time capsule, seemingly killing him, but allowed Robin to escape instead. If I had to sum it up, he seemed to want change at all cost, but this sight really changed him. He really lost a lot of faith in his creed and the Marine organization, and no longer was the bright-eyed Marine he used to be. A little bit later, he was then promoted to Marine Admiral, but his justice had now changed. He adopted lazy justice and became a very lax man. But still, the glimmers of his burning justice stayed around, as we saw him absolutely go wild during the Summit War. And to me, this is something that I think really makes Kuzan a crazy interesting character. He's way more human than most villains, especially the Marines. He doesn't kill aimlessly and often will assist or allow pirates to go if they prove to be good people, as he does with the Straw Hats. You know, to the point where he sometimes feels more like an ally almost than a villain. And all of this came to a head after Marineford though, because Sengoku stepped down as Fleet Admiral and thus recommended Aokiji for the job, but the higher-ups wanted someone with more fire, and so Sasasuki, aka Akainu, was also another prime candidate. And so the two did the only logical thing. They battled it out at Punk Hazard for over 10 days, completely changing the island into a fiery and icy hellscape. After this crazy battle, which I hope we'll get to see one day in the story, Aokiji left the Marines and went by his own name, Kuzan, once again. He also lost his leg and started creating a cool ice leg to replace it when he walks, which is kind of, you know, not as important, but pretty awesome. gotta, you know, put some props there. And this is also where I get to be a little bit of a theory head, because honestly, I'm not that certain that he even lost that fight. It's a pretty common idea that in this moment, the Battle of Punk Hazard, Aokiji and Akainu came to an agreement, or Aokiji opted to forego the title in favor of leading Sword. Now, the Sword organization is a special branch of the Marines that focuses on generally better off-book operations that don't exactly line up with, you know, the wishes of the Celestial Dragons. As a result, they have to do everything without a ton of resources or backing, like invading Kaido's crew in the case of X-Strike, or possibly abandoning the military to defeat Blackbeard, in the case of Kuzan. Now, this is of course not yet confirmed, but it's a pretty likely option, so I do feel like I should bring it up here, or else you might get in the comments and yell at me for not doing so, rightfully. But regardless, that is the next most important thing for Kuzan, because after he left the Marines, he got himself a pretty cool looking penguin sidekick named Camel and joined the Blackbeard Pirates as one of his 10 Titanic commanders. But don't worry, according to him, he hasn't changed at all and is still the same good old Kuzan he was before. That's at least what he told Smoker after stopping Doflamingo from killing him at least. And I kind of trust Kuzan here because, well, he's really chill like that and has no reason to lie, and he was really nice to the Straw Hats every time they interacted, and that's how we eventually got the epic fight between him and and Garp on Hachinosu. Because after kidnapping Charlotte Pudding, a member of the Three-Eye Tribe capable potentially of reading the poneglyphs, Kuzan returned to Hachinosu as well, and here he came face to face with his old teacher and mentor on Beehive Island as Garp was attempting to break free Kobe from the Blackbeard Pirates prison. And after defeating him with some help from some of the other Blackbeard Pirates, the next we saw him was in chapter 1121, seemingly framed to be one of the greatest threats in the final war. Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe that for sure his powers are absolutely crazy, but why? He seems so good and nice, and well, that's why I think that he is, after all, part of SWORD. It's kind of very unlike this dude and his sense of justice to join Blackbeard out of all the pirates out there, but it is way more likely that he's only joining him to earn his trust and dismantle his operations from the inside. That, or he really is just doing what he thinks is necessary to defeat the Marines and will just walk away afterwards, but it doesn't feel as fun, I gotta admit. And seeing as we're talking right now about one of the possible SWORD candidates from the Admirals, the next natural choice is the blind man himself, Fujitora. That's right, I do think that it's actually very likely that he is also a SWORD member, but he might also end up as the next Fleet Admiral if we're being honest, because we've seen him defy orders and have a true sense of righteousness plenty of times, really, caring for the people of the world. Like when he apologizes for the military's actions during Dressrosa, or when he allowed the slaves to leave during the revolutionaries' attack as well. And don't worry, we'll get more into it in just a moment, but I do want to cover some fun facts about him as well. For example, Fujitora's real name is Isho. Now, Fujitora actually means lilac or wisteria-colored tiger. Wisteria is a specific shade of the color purple and a purple flower native to Japan. It's really beautiful. You should come see it. Also, despite what you may think based on his katana and general vibe, he's actually not from the land of Wano, but actually a small kingdom known as Aoi. Also, since I know you're dying to know which famous actor he's actually based on, he's directly inspired by Shintaro Katsu. And more than any other role, this dude takes inspiration from the character Zatoichi, a blind swordsman who also loves gambling, uses a cane sword, and in fact, many of his named attacks are based on films featuring Zatoichi as well. And speaking of his awesome cane sword, it's also one of the 12 supreme grade blades in One Piece known as the Yakuza Kasen. So take that, other admirals. This dude doesn't need powers to create ice or light blades, he just stays strapped with one of the 12 greatest blades ever created. I know, no big deal, but pretty cool. Also, Fujitora is one of the 2 admirals who were not initially Marines, but were recruited in a post-Summit War draft to fill Akainu and Aokiji spots. And Fujitora is actually full of weird special quirks that separate him quite a lot from any of the other admirals. Like, for example, he was actually a war criminal before he was recruited, which ties into why he ends up being blind, or the fact that he actively opposes what the world government tends to do. But in my opinion, the biggest and most interesting difference is that he is the only admiral without a Logia Devil Fruit. Instead, he wields the Zushi Zushi no Mi, a gravity-based paramecia fruit, and trust me when I say, this might be straight up the craziest power any of the Marines have. Which I know is saying a lot, considering one of them turns things into literal rust and another might be the forest god. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But with his gravity-bending powers, Fujitora can press people into the ground to restrain them, swing gravity blade strikes from his sword, and just straight up level buildings with his gravity forces that he projects around him. But it goes without saying, my favorite and his most iconic ability is of course using his power to straight up grab and drop meteors on his opponents. Yeah, this dude is capable of affecting things in orbit and bringing them down to the planet. An absolutely insane, Madara level feat, unlike anything else in the series. Well, except maybe NL's Raigo, since it is crazy destructive too, but unlike the other admirals, we don't know too much about his history that led him to adopt his humane justice, but I do know that he's generally a much more reasonable person than the other admirals. Fujitora just wants the world to be straight up better and has a true hatred for evil, and this seems to come from something that he witnessed in the past, the thing that caused him to blind himself, as he mentions that not being able to see in Dressrosa is kind of a blessing for him, which is, one of the darkest things Oda has written in One Piece. And this also makes it fairly clear that he views his role in this fight as one of safety and prosperity, not that of murder and violence, and he kind of puts the people first. Fujitora wants to create a better One Piece world, a world that he would be proud to look upon in his youth, and this is why he led the charge of dismantling the 7 Warlord system based on the events of Alabasta and especially in Dressrosa. Also, seemingly he has faith in the Seraphim to institute this better world in their stead, instead, in like replacing the warlords, as he puts a lot of confidence in the special science group to fill the void left by the violent obsolete warlord system. And then there is Ryokugyu, aka Admiral Greenbull, who is just straight up the exact opposite. And since it's the beginning of his segment, I really want to take a moment here and point out how strange it is that collectively the One Piece community, including you and including me, usually calls him Greenbull. It seems natural, but I straight up don't know why, considering we call every single other admiral by either their name or their Japanese title. Again, just to show this to you, like, imagine if we were talking to me and I just casually said, oh yeah, Admiral Blue Pheasant instead of Aokiji or Kuzan, or if I opened this video going, today we're gonna be talking about Wisteria Tiger. You'd bully me, rightly so, for the next decade. And I don't know why this is not the case for him as well, but alas, Admiral Greenbull it is. I mean, maybe Ryokugyu is just hard to say. I don't know. Needless to say, he's a doozy. I mean, his real name is Aramaki, and he is the counterpart, quite literally, to Fujitora, another admiral who was drafted and put straight up into the admiral tier during the time skip. And since I can actually literally hear you screaming through the screen at me, begging me to tell you what actor he's based on, alright, it's Yoshio Harada, you probably saw that coming, right? Who played a character named Aramaki in the film Ronin Gai, which actually is pretty neat, considering that film also stars the actor that inspired Borsalino and Isho, fitting as, they're collectively the current 3 admirals. Actually, him and Isho also have a cool little wordplay thing going on with their title as the Bull and Tiger, that being that they represent the Oni from the legend of Momotaro, the same legend that the other 3 admirals got their animals from, the monkey, the pheasant, and the dog, and the same one that Momonosuke got his name from as well. And it's really fitting considering that we meet both of them during Momo's arc, and Momo directly faces off against Greenbull at the end of Wano as well. Also, another quick fun fact for you, if you're watching this in the future, he was the final admiral revealed to us in the series, and I think that goes, into a little bit of what I was saying about his title being what we call him, because for years until the end of Wano, theorists like myself had to imagine what his powers actually were, what his name was, and even what his design was. I mean, Greenbull was really all that we kind of had to go off. And so it wasn't until the defeat of Kaido that we got to see what he was truly capable of, which, by the way, is, despite appearances, quite a lot. Because Aramaki wields the so-called mighty Mori Mori no Mi, a forest-themed Logia fruit, which means that he can transform into a giant tree-like form, which reminds me a ton of the Ents from Lord of the Rings for some reason, as well as create flowers to fly with, drain the liquid out of anyone his roots touch, and just generally use plants to attack and do kind of whatever he wants. He can even use photosynthesis, I guess. Another kind of cool side effect of his powers, which don't fit his personality at all, is that he also creates flora and flowers wherever he walks, as seen during Wano when he is strolling through Udon. And actually, I just looked it up, the dude can just straight up use the incredible power of photosynthesis. In case you skipped 3rd grade science class, that means he can absorb the sunlight and convert it into food and energy for himself. Now, we actually learned that he had not eaten for 3 years when we first met him, which kind of helped theorists like me deduce that he had a somewhat plant-based Logia way before his, actual debut, the entire green thing, and I don't need to eat, kind of made a lot of sense. Despite him not having the power to become intangible like a regular Logia-type fruit user would, he does seem to circumvent this issue and can only be damaged by Haki attacks due to his incredible regenerative power. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if fire and lightning are a big weakness for him as well, as we do know that Logia powers do suffer from their traditional weaknesses, as seen by Crocodile losing to some water. But I will say, interestingly enough, Momo's and Raizo's fire did not work on him at all, that we know. But I do wonder if that will be the case when, you combine insane Haki into the mix as well. Maybe that will actually open up the path to defeat him for good. And yeah, I'll quickly step into theory territory now for a second to call out a quick spoiler, so timestamp on screen real quick in case you are anime only again. Let me remind you that the Straw Hats may have an ally in the form of Loki, Loki, who quite literally is the bane of the Atom Tree. Like, I'm just saying, it would make a lot of sense for Loki to stand off, you know, against Admiral Greenbull in the final war if that would be how that all pans out. All right, back to Greenbull, because there is something else that I needed to talk about here. As I mentioned a while ago, there is a high chance that Greenbull could be filling the role of the forest god in the modern era. I mean, Luffy is the next Nika, the sun god, and we can pretty safely theorize based on, you know, what we got in Skypiea that a rain, forest, and earth god are also somewhere out there as a result. And for Aramaki, his powers line up, his tree mode makes sense, and overall I feel like it's just a pretty safe guess to play off. I actually covered this idea in my Chopper is the forest god theory, so if you want to know more, you can check that out later. But as for his personality, Greenbull is basically the total opposite of Isho in that regard as well. He's passionate and incredibly loyal to Sakazuki. They must maybe have a book club or play beach volleyball together, because I swear, dude, the broyalty is pretty strong in this guy. As a result, he also is an advocate of absolute justice and manifested in the form of his specific determined justice. In other words, he's the type of guy that's gonna get it done even if his body and spirit are truly tested. However, he has been shown to disregard Sakazuki despite his dedication to him, as long as he truly thinks it's the right call. For example, he did not kick Fujitora out of Marijoa when he was asked, and actively went to Wano despite Akainu telling him not to. And honestly, this probably has to do with his origin story, because Aramaki is actually a former cop from the Taya Kingdom, somewhere in the South Blue it turns out, and had some deep and serious incident occur with a woman that caused him to get thrown into prison. Eventually, during the military draft, word of his power made its way to the world government, and boom, he got straight promoted to one of the highest status positions in the entire world military, which really says a lot about their core values as well, because there is no logical reason a person convicted and charged with crimes should hold a government title and power like this, especially under an Akainu leadership who's usually all about, no, criminals, all bad, blah blah. So seriously, can you imagine someone with that reputation being given the power to call in bomb strikes on islands like a Buster Call in the real world? It would never happen. And overall, this kind of feeds into, you know, the part of Aramaki's character that yearns for upholding the world noble system and the natural hierarchy of the One Piece world. His power as a cop and now as a marine shows that he likes to maintain and desires world order by any means necessary. Probably must be rooted in his mysterious backstory, and maybe one day we might actually get that. But before that happens, I really think you should first go and for a second check out the Ohara Patreon, because let's face it, between you and me, the creator world is kind of hard. I've got a big team of fantastic people working to bring you the best content like this, I hope you're enjoying it, that I can, and paying them, you know, costs some pretty berry if you catch my drift. And that's why I put a ton of extra effort into my Patreon, where you can get early access to certain videos like my Drink Sake podcast, exclusive theory reviews, and other bonus content, as well as access to my art team's amazing art, like the absolutely insane thumbnails that we make. All your money goes straight back into videos like these, back to you. And if you want to see that and check that out, go join the Ohara fleet. I promise it's worth it if you like my content. So with that, the bills have been paid, and we're also already at 4 out of 5 major admirals, but there are a few that we can talk about briefly here that have in the past occupied the title, or have at least been stated to deserve it on multiple occasions. For instance, we know that Sengoku, the Golden Buddha, was a former admiral and fleet admiral during the series. His mythical Golden Buddha fruit allowed him to take that title, and he was actually the man who orchestrated and oversaw the Buster Call on Ohara. And even though we haven't seen him in his prime, we do know that he's an absolute unit, as he helped, you know, Garp, for example, take down the Golden Lion Shiki, a Yonko level fighter, and Sengoku was framed to rival Whitebeard at Marineford. Oh yeah, and he also casually dropped all of the Blackbeard pirates with a single strike at Marineford, which is still one of the coldest moments a Marine has ever had, period, in my opinion. And then there's also his boss, which I am always so intrigued by, the former fleet admiral and current commander-in-chief of the world government, Kong. Straight up, I always want to, you know, tell you more about this dude besides that, but all we know is that he runs the world government, oversees the Marines and Cypherpole, and was at least an admiral during God Valley, and the fleet admiral then during the Battle of Ed War between Roger and Shiki. And now, while that's technically all of the canon Marines, I do want to talk about one former non-canon Marine admiral very quickly, just so I can truly feel like this video covers everything there is to know about the Admirals, because in Film Z, my personal favorite One Piece movie, we're introduced to a former Admiral and trainer in the Marines called Zephyr, oh man, and I butchered his name. Zephyr, I think, is his name in English. Anyways, this dude is awesome. He has a crazy sick design and tries to destroy the world alongside his Neo Marines. Out of all the One Piece movies, this is the one I genuinely wish would maybe be canon, because Film Z had some sick concepts about how the Marines are trained and really connected characters like Garp, Kuzan, Borsalino, and Akainu, but I digress. Instead, he's non-canon, and before we cover the current Fleet Admiral, Sakazuki, I should once more mention that if Garp wanted to, he could have absolutely become an Admiral, and honestly probably would be Fleet Admiral also. Instead, we find out through him that there is much more red tape to being an Admiral than we all thought, and he's allowed to truly get away with most of his shenanigans because he is just a Vice Admiral. However, it's clear that it is a formality because Sengoku, Akainu, and pretty much everyone else can't actually stop him from doing whatever he sees fit for his own justice. And I'm still very much in the camp that thinks that if Sengoku hadn't stopped Garp, he might have just smacked Akainu to death during Marineford as well. With that all being said though, I can finally now cover my boy, the reddest of the dogs, Akainu. That's what that stands for, by the way, and it's actually very apparent in his moveset as he fires off literal magma dogs at people. His real name, as I've mentioned a few times already, is Sakazuki, and he gets that from the name of one of the movies from actor Bunta Sugawara, the man who inspired his design. I actually find it kind of ironic that his name is Sakazuki, because here in Japan that is actually what, the little sake sharing ceremony that Luffy, Ace, and Sabo partake. That's what that's called. I have it for my podcast too. These are little, like the sake cups are called Sakazuki cups. So it's kind of like Oda's biggest FU to those three. Definitely ties him into their story deeper than the entire Ace murder part, I guess. And, I guess that brought them closer together as well. Oh, and how did he murder Ace, you ask? Well, thank you for setting up that segue, man. I really appreciate it. He actually does that by using his Magu Magu no Mi, the Magma Logia fruit, to just absolutely donut the entire competition. His body is completely made of magma, and according to Oda, it is canonically the most destructive devil fruit in the world. Now, I assume he means more from a raw damage potential, because obviously fruits like Whitebeard and Kaido seem at least to be more capable of insane and widespread destruction, but maybe we're wrong. And it does kind of leave me wondering what he could do that compares to Kuzan freezing an entire island. And that's actually kind of terrifying when you replace ice with magma. That makes everything so much worse. Now, philosophically, Sakazuki lives by his mantra of thorough justice, which matches his totally destructive habits. He will absolutely destroy his enemy and accomplish his goal without any wiggle room for mercy. This can be seen by the fact that despite his best efforts, Robin escaped Ohara, and he views that entire, destruction that he did there and killing all the people as a massive failure. And since she, and I guess by association Saul, lived, he still needs them dead for the sake of thoroughness. This is very likely a big point why he was such a great candidate for Fleet Admiral, as his philosophy dictates the current course of the Marines, forcing them to be a lethal and complete fighting force that shows, no mercy to any pirate, no matter how good they are. And there is absolutely no room for error under his rule. And maybe it's just me, but I do think it's pretty clear that he's drank all of the Marine Kool-Aid at this point. Like, he's the most patriotic and dedicated member of the entire world government, and I think this gets really clear when we look at his views on the current leader of the Revolutionary Army, Monkey D. Dragon. Because if you weren't aware, and a mild manga spoiler here, Dragon was revealed to be a former Marine, something theorized for a very long time, and he clearly had some sort of ties to Sakazuki, because at Marineford, this guy was just obsessed with Luffy. Like, he wanted him dead so badly, and the biggest reason wasn't Ace, it wasn't his piracy, it wasn't even Luffy himself, it was the fact that he was Dragon's son. So whatever Dragon did as a Marine, or because he left and they were really best buddies and he kind of felt abandoned, something like that, it must have really stuck with Akainu, because this dude hates him, like loathes him, like burning hatred. Now, we don't know too much about his early life, but we do know that in his youth he completes the Admiral theme by wielding a a red-hilted katana. But no, what's actually more important is his contributions to the Ohara raid, where he absolutely annihilated anyone attempting to flee the island. He's pretty thorough as a guy, that's for sure, but it was also this ruthlessness, you know, that in the end proved that he had what it takes to be an admiral, as he was promoted sometime shortly after. Now, of course, as we mentioned, this moment is also what forged the rivalry between him and Aokiji, as they obviously had very different views of justice during that Buster call. But I must admit that he does seem to have a weirdly soft side sometimes. Like, he doesn't just throw marine lives at the wall if the challenge is too large, and this is shown by him refusing to send any marines into Wano when the Big Mom and Kaido alliance was first formed. Not to mention, he recently had a really interesting case of care and compassion towards Kizaru at the end of Egghead Island, but I personally think it's best shown off in his, and I do stress this, relatively kind treatment of Bonnie after she was captured by the Marines. Now, this might actually have something to do with a very common theory that Akainu might be a father himself, and we actually may know his daughter. This sword member, the one obsessed with Kobe, named Hibari, because Akainu and her speak with the same Japanese dialect. They're both from the North Blue and share the same blood type, which, you know, some people have pointed out seems to point at the idea of them potentially being related. Now, if that's the case, I do think he might just be nicer to Bonnie because he knows what her father did to keep her alive, and he can kind of respect that as a father himself. But again, that one isn't quite confirmed yet, so, you know, take it with a grain of salt. What is confirmed, though, is the fact that Sakazuki, as Fleet Admiral, knows way more than the rest of the Marines do about, you know, the hidden stuff. He's directly responsible for dealing with the Gorosei, which is kind of weird because you'd think that that would be Kong's job, but apparently, I don't know what does Kong actually do? Anyways, and when Vegapunk revealed some crazy truth about the true history of the world, Sakazuki isn't all that surprised. He's more angry. There is a reason that he's one of the final villains of the series, at least probably, and it's pretty clear that his role in the endgame of the story will carry with it some really big reveals. My personal guess is that it will be centered around Dragon, Luffy, and some oddly intertwined things between him and their lives. And I wouldn't be too surprised if he himself is the reason Dragon wasn't able to raise Luffy and had to watch from afar instead. But also, speaking of Akainu and Luffy's inevitable confrontation, unless Akainu actually, you know, pulls a really surprising character arc, which there have been some hints, but let's say it happens, I think we should see what would actually happen. And screw that, let's talk about Luffy and all the Admirals, honestly, because at this point, he's faced off against all of them except Greenbull, and maybe it's just me, but I do want to know if Luffy is strong enough to handle all of them. Luckily, though, I did go over exactly that in this video right here, dealing with what would happen if Luffy battled all of the Admirals in a gauntlet and how he could beat them with the imaginary powers of Gear 5. Check it out. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, thanks so much again to all the Patreon members, and I will see you in the next one.